Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of CSM Practice Podcast, where we bring you customer success executives from the trenches to tell you what works, what doesn't, and showcase what kind of initiatives they have recently implemented and what do you need to change in your world. I promise you, after this podcast episode, you're going to think about customer surveys completely differently. We're going to completely rock your world. The way I came into this topic and to this particular guest today is by reading an interesting blog on LinkedIn about the topic. And I'm going to add the link to that blog in the description of this podcast episode. So go ahead and check that out. And in the meantime, today I have Boaz Maor. We've been very good friends for many years, and he has been in the seat of the Chief Customer Officer for at least a decade. I want to let him tell his story because I think it's quite extraordinary. And like I said, I think you're going to learn a lot. Boaz Maor, welcome so much to join me on this show. I'm very excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a while since we last talked, but I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Before we dig into the details of how you completely changed your approach to collecting customer feedback, NPS, surveys, all of that jam, because I think this topic has been discussed so many times, but you're actually bringing a fresh new perspective that I'm excited to share with everyone. Can you share a little bit about what kind of situation were you in when you start having these thoughts? What kind of company were you working for? How large was the CSM team? What kind of clients did they work with?
I joined about 5 years ago a small point of sale solution to small businesses. The first thing that I learned very, very quickly is that when your entire book of business is small businesses, 82% of my customers paid us less than $1,000 a year in SaaS fees. Very, very small. Relative to serving enterprises, you literally cannot spend a lot of one-on-one time with customers. There's just not enough money in there. I needed to develop very quickly better mechanisms to collect the voice of the customer. Obviously, we had a very strong, good performing support organization. So we had the CSAT and all of the statistics on support. But I needed more than that. I needed to understand the customer, what they do, what they like, what they don't like. So we decided to deploy a net promoter score as our methodology. I worked it in some different places. Sarah Buccino, that I hired as my VP of customer management, worked with some NPS before. And together we were thinking about NPS is one of those metrics that everybody loves to hate. People like it, people hate it. There's a lot of controversy out there. And when we looked at the good and the bad of NPS, we figured fairly quickly that we can actually make it work well for us. If you understand it, you can deploy it in a good way and overcome the challenges while using the benefit. What's good about NPS? Well, two things. One, it's a single question. When you have only a single question and you do it well, you should have a very high response rate. And if you ever did survey, you know that if you don't have high response rate, the survey is not worth anything. So we spend a tremendous amount of energy around how do we drive the best response rate, and the fact that NPS is a single question helped. The second benefit of NPS from the way we thought about it is it's a very rigid definition of the question. Based on your experience to date, would you recommend us to a colleague or a friend? You don't change a word in this. And because it's so rigid, you can compare and contrast. You can benchmark against other companies, competitors. You can benchmark against different scenarios. The rigidity is a benefit. Now, the challenges of NPS, and this is where we spend a lot of time to overcome, so it actually works for us, is one, it's a single question. How much information do you really get when you only get one data point from a customer, 9760? And the second problem, predominantly with NPS, is statistically, when we looked at research out there, there's not a strong correlation between the NPS results and renewals, retention. And if there isn't a correlation, then what's the point? These are the two main problems that we hear and that we also encounter. So we set up to develop a different methodology that actually works for us.
Before we dig into that, you mentioned two things. One, high response rate. Two, consistency. I can think of one problem that you haven't mentioned. I heard a lot, and I actually seen it with some of the clients I worked very closely with, where we would embed actually the NPS question in a larger survey. We got a decent response rate, albeit the multiple questions. But we did have a comment. They did
Comment field. Yep.
exactly like the next question after the NPS was give us why did you score us like that? I'm not saying everybody provided highlights, but when they did, you know what we found? We found another issue with NPS. Some of them gave the NPS score based on their experience with the product. The explanation of why there was a detractor score was some features that were missing or how clunky the UI was. It had nothing to do with the overall experience of the customer. And some of them gave a 10 because the CSM was awesome. We tried to get an NPS around the holistic experience. And what we found is that you could have the best customer success strategy and engagement model and still get a very poor NPS. As a chief customer officer, I was looking at mostly ladies that I worked with. They were like, well, if they don't give us a comment, there's zero understanding of why this is happening. It's so ambiguous.
That's right. So again, you're describing the reality. Let's agree on two things. First, I'm not familiar with any system that is perfect. If you go after depth of understanding of your customers via one-to-one interviews, site visit, that's not scalable. If you go after high response rate via very, very short surveys, you get limited information. There are always trade-offs. Okay, let's start with that. Can we agree on that?
I just dispute the fact that you can't do it perfectly. I can't wait to hear your framework because I'm sure you solved for some of these issues. I'm just not sure you solved for that one.
What I'm saying is the starting point is there are trade-offs. And what you describe is a trade-off. When you only have few data points, you only ask one or two questions, you don't get a wealth of information. I get it.
But I'm just saying, why even ask the question unless you just want to benchmark against other, how you do versus industry and overall for the benchmark purposes. But I actually wholeheartedly believe that if you ask more pointed questions, you can actually get actionable feedback. And my contention with NPS is mostly about its ambiguity and the lack of our ability to say if we are getting better, we don't know why. If we're getting worse, we don't know why. So how can we can't take any data driven actions? It's kind of like dart in the dark.
I look at what you just did as a setup for a spike if this was a volleyball game. I love it. What you describe is the challenge we were trying to solve. We fully understand it. What the thinking that we had is response rate is king. If we get a very high response rate, we can solve a lot of your problem. Point number two, and this is a lot of, I think, challenge I see with NPS, I think the trend is dramatically more valuable than the actual score. When someone comes to me and say, my NPS is 25 or 73 or -3, it's a number. It doesn't give me a lot. I can benchmark against other companies, but if you show me a trend, it goes up, it goes down, it has a certain peak. I can learn a lot from the trend because then I can say, okay, here are things that happened. I can correlate to the trend. I can glean some insight. The third piece, which is, I think, quite fundamental in every survey, but especially in something that's so light touch like NPS, is targeting the right persona. Because in many companies, there are different people. And if you touch different people and don't know the differences, you miss the point. The fourth, which was fundamental to the way we solve it, is timing is everything. The level of knowledge the customer has of your solution, the good things and the bad things, changes over time. When they buy, they have a certain amount of information. After they completed their implementation, they have a little bit more information. And if you touch the same person in the same method different times, and you can look at the trend, you start to get insights. You can isolate the problems from one another. The fifth item is what you said before, which is the comments are gold. Comments are so valuable, but again, you need a framework to turn the qualitative text into some quantitative action, which we build as a mechanism. We collected the comments and then we isolated each one and associated it with a topic. We got a number of comments, but at the end I would say X% of the comments are about this and Y% of the comments are about that. You then differentiate between the promoters, neutral, and detractors, and say, hey, here are the things that drive the detractors. Here are the things that drive the promoters. Now, because you have a lot of data and you're very meticulous about how you capture it, you can actually turn even the qualitative comments into quantitative insights that drive your actions. So that's quite powerful.
It sounds like, yes, you had the one question, but what you were doing with the data is analyzing both at the account level. So you had some things that you did better at the account level. You talked about persona, you talk about trend of the NPS at the account level, and then you also leverage the data to have some executive level decisions around the entire customer base. I think a lot of times most companies just leverage it either or, and they don't know how to analyze it, A, at the account level, and B, at the executive level. So one is benefiting the CSM and the other one benefit the company. And you talk about two types of analysis here, and I think it's very important to make that distinction.
Absolutely. What did we do? One, the survey was one question. It wasn't NPS as part of a lot of other things. One question, the standard NPS. It was followed by an optional text field, but we made sure that we capture the data, the answer, before we added the comment field. Because something I learned from people I worked with at SurveyMonkey, every question you add to a survey cut the response rate in half.
Oof, wow.
They are the survey company. They know a lot about it. They ran it. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to ask one question. I'm going to get my answer. And then I'm going to pop up an optional, do you also want? By the way, we got between 22 and 25% response rate for our NPS, which is about 10x what normal studies get. 10x consistently throughout our 2.5 years that we've used it. Normal surveys get 2 to 3% response rate.
Okay, so you got 20% eventually, yes?
We got between 22 and 25 consistently.
That's pretty good,
On
actually.
top of that, we got 20% to give us comments, which is wonderful also.
Wow.
So again, we had a lot of data. Back to the methodology. One question, one optional text field. We asked it 3 times along the life cycle of the customer. Immediately after they go live, 3 months later, and then annually. The comparison of the data between those three, among those three, was gold. Because the level of insight of the customer, the level of knowledge, the level of engagement with us is very different. And therefore, we could articulate what do we need to do, where are the problems. The third component is we used in-app. We use Pendo, but there are other tools as well. That makes it much more contextual to the customer. We can pinpoint exactly when we want the feedback. We also can pinpoint who the persona that we want to target, which is critical. And then the last thing in the methodology that we found to be very helpful is we added before the question an explanation, why do we ask? Because customers often suffer from survey fatigue, and they are fearful that you're going to ask them again and again and again. So we were very simple. Congratulations on going live. Now that we have gone live, can you give us feedback? Congratulations on completing 3 months working with our solution. Can you provide us feedback? Congratulations on first full year of working with this product. Can you give us feedback? And the customer in their mind are saying, okay, I only go once over 1 year, so I'm not likely to get another survey tomorrow. Might as well provide the feedback. So we've spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we maximize the response rate so we can do all of this other analysis. Then in the back end, we created a tremendous amount of metadata analysis from Salesforce, from Pendo, for telemetry, etc. So we can create all of those wonderful analysis of the data against different factors so we can gain insights about what is it that the customer is attributing the whatever number, 6, 5, 2, 10 that they gave us.
Like which features, which modules did they use in the period approximating the survey?
So let me give you an example. If we see that there is a significant difference within one segment of customers between the score they gave us after they go live and 3 months later, then we can say, okay, what is different in the 3 months of work that they didn't know and didn't interact with in the implementation. We need to tackle that because there was a big drop, or maybe there wasn't. For example, when we compare customers who use our professional services for deployment versus they worked on their own, what was the difference? If there's a big difference, we can pinpoint what was done differently and act on that. If we launch a new solution and we all of a sudden see a difference in the response from customers, we say, okay, that solution had an impact. Let's understand and tackle that. When you have a lot of data, there's tremendous power to your analysis.
Did you get higher response rates on the in-app or email, or was it persona dependent?
In-app got much higher response rate. We learned from people like Uber and Lyft. The moment the ride ends, it's on your screen. So it's very timely and it's only one click. And by the way, it's the same amount of effort for you, the user, to close it, which they enable you, right? There's an X, or to give the feedback. So might as well give the feedback. And their response rate is through the roof. They also block the screen. You can't go anywhere else in the application if you don't provide that feedback or close. You have to interact. We learned from that. We did what we can. There was some limitation that we didn't want to be overly painful on the customer, but in-app enables you to hide the rest of the screen, play with colors and positioning and size so you can hone in on the customer. And again, you need to strike that balance between being overly powerful and piss off the customer, but being guided to, we need this one thing. By the way, we consistently throughout the organization spend a lot of time position this not as a survey, because survey feels like heavy, feels like a lot of work. We called it a one-click feedback form. Hey, Mr. Customer, do you mind if I send you a one-click feedback form? Yeah, sure, it's one click, who cares?
There's a saying that goes, you have to meet the customers where they are. And I think this is one of the reasons why we get much higher response rate in general on in-app, because they're already there.
And they're there with a mindset of you. When you send them an email, they go into their inbox, they have a lot of other things to do. You are one of many. But when you're on the application, your mind is set up to that. Might as well give one click.
Also, I think as you're analyzing the NPS data, you might as well check what were they doing at the moment that you send them the NPS question. This could be top of mind right now. I'm trying to do this thing. I'm not happy. I'm going to give you a detractor score, even though maybe if you call me in another day doing something else, maybe having an aha moment in your application, I'm going to give you a 10. So I think it's very contextual as well.
I think that's a very fair point, and it's something we all need to acknowledge. Not every signal from a customer is the best signal. There are some responses when we read and we say, that doesn't make sense, or the customer didn't understand it for whatever reason, or they were just petty. I get it. It's not perfect. Again, if you get a lot of data points, a higher response rate, it's okay. If you don't, garbage in, garbage out.
You mentioned like a slew of correlations you were trying to create between the NPS score, from persona to milestones and phases in the customer journey to a bunch of other stuff. I was wondering, were there any other data points you were trying to see if there was a correlation and you actually found that there is none in terms of attributes versus the actual score? Like I could see how someone might say, oh, size of clients, there's no real correlation between the NPS score and the size. I'm just giving an example.
Size was not a big issue for us because our customers are relatively same size. So there wasn't a big difference there. Region was not an issue, almost no difference. Persona, strangely enough, was not a big driver for us for whatever reason. Timing was a big difference. Segment of industry was a big difference. Retailers versus restaurants versus services, which makes sense when we thought about it because they're using a slightly different solution. The use case is slightly different. Competition is a little bit different. So the relevancy is different. But it helped us hone in on what do we need to do. In this segment, it works well. In that other segment, it doesn't. Well, we need to work on this one. It also helped the sales and marketing to know, hey, here is where it works well. Sell more of that.
What's the ICP? What's the ideal customer profile? Boaz, that resonates so much with. Just last week, I had another podcast interview with someone, and he said he's done a similar analysis, not with NPS surveys, but he actually wanted to see if there was a correlation between churn rates and the type of industry that his customers were coming from, because he had like three different enterprises and like the actual consumer. And he was able to pinpoint a specific cohort of clients that is a specific type. As you mentioned yourself, like the restaurants were different than the retail, same deal. And then they actually came up with, what do we need to zero in on? What type of customer do we need to zero in on and change our strategy? They actually moved from 80% renewals to 95 or 98% renewals, something crazy like that in no time, like less than 12 months, because they were able to do this analysis. So I think you're a spot on thinking, hey, listen, if we're going to do the NPS question, it's important to look at trends, but also see, like, analyze by industry or type of clients if you do work with completely different organizations.
Again, I think it all starts and ends with the response rate. If you have a high response rate, you have a lot of data, you can slice and dice the data in more ways to pinpoint the problem. So when people come to me and say, hey, NPS is useless, it's only one question, I can't learn from this, my response is, if you get high response rate and you have the metadata on those customers, there's actually a lot of data you can analyze and help you pinpoint. Add to that the comments, and now you have gold. You have a tremendous amount of data to work with. 22 to 25% response rate for the surveys and over 20% of them providing comments is wealth of information to analyze. And we were very specific. And then in our meetings that we had, monthly meeting to share the data, huge amount of people joined the meetings, which to me is a great success criteria. When you go into meetings to present data and not a lot of people show up, probably your analysis doesn't make sense to people or doesn't add value. But if a lot of people come to the meeting, you're probably doing something right, something of interest.
I want to say that the key is in the way you analyze and present the results. If it's not actionable, or it's the same every time, or it's too high level, it doesn't make sense, then nobody's going to listen. But if every time you bring some stories, interesting quotas, or you organize the data in a visual way that shows that we progressed or the changes, it's fantastic that you've done that. So let me ask you this. If anybody that's listening wanted to do the same, they already have a survey tool, SurveyMonkey. That's like anybody can have survey. It's so easy. But I think the devil is in the details. And what I mean by that is that you actually need to have somebody very talented in your organization that, for the comments, knows and have the tools to do verbatim analysis. Thank God for ChatGPT. You can now do verbatim analysis in ChatGPT, but I would say still you need to structure the comments. There's tools out there that would do it for you. And then for quantitative, you need somebody that's very skilled in collecting the data, transposing the data in a way that, let's not sneeze on that. Like, that is a critical part to just having anybody show up to these meetings or having any actionable insights. So, what are some tips that you've learned along the way in just preparing? Because sending the question, fine, but how do you get ready to have amazing analysis?
We spent a tremendous amount of effort with the BI team, literally hook them to this project from day one, because we needed a lot of data. Again, the whole point is we needed the metadata, otherwise we just have one data point. So tremendous amount of work. By the way, evolving. Every week we added more data. Every month we added another data source. It evolved and improved over time. By the way, in the meetings with the product team, the sales team, questions come up all the time that increased our roadmap of what additional data we want to get additional analysis. Get a BI person on this team from day one is hugely important. Second, we actually, Sarah on my team, with me, with some of the other CSMs, with the BI people, created a framework, which we also improved over time, to analyze the comments into categories. Ease of use, for example, was a category, but the customer doesn't say ease of use. They describe something that you need to say, okay, that comment is an ease of use comment. Now let's see how many I have ease of use in detractors versus promoters, in this segment versus this segment, etc. So a framework to get from qualitative text comments into categories was very, very important. And third is timing. You have to respond quickly enough to keep people abreast and interested in keep listening, keep giving you feedback. Again, that's true with customers, and that's true internally with the different teams.
Yeah, I love that you leveraged showcasing the results of monthly meeting to actually get the requirements back to the BI team. So it wasn't, oh, Boaz Maor, wants to do some deeper analysis. It's actually, hey, we've been to this meeting. A bunch of people came from the entire organization, and this is what the organization wants.
Absolutely.
What was your minimal viable product? Like the first time you launched the NPS survey with a mindset, hey, we're going to analyze this. What were the original few things that you analyzed it by? What did you start with? What was the easiest thing?
The first viable product was one question with a text box launched at 2 places immediately after the customer goes live and 3 months later. We then figured out, again, it was a little bit of work internally to figure out how to do the annual one and get the data at the same time. We added most of the metadata over time. So early on, we had very little amount of data about who the customer is, and over time we got more. Their personas, their segment, how long they've been, all of these other factors came in, what specific products they were using after time. And then again, we launched and then we started to improve. So we changed the layout on the screen many, many times. A/B testing, what works better, what works worse. For example, do you put the survey or the one-click feedback form before a customer takes an action or after?
Oh, wow. What did you find?
We wanted to be nice to the customer and put it after, and we saw the response rate decline because once they're done with the action, they go somewhere else, and it's easier to get it before. But before, you don't get the full feedback of they've taken the action. So again, optimization over time. A lot of those decisions, color schemes, size on the screen, covering the background or not, enabling an easy X button to close or not.
What was like the best setup then? Okay, before the action, if you're doing in-app, what kind of fonts? Big, small, black?
What we found is that masking the background was helpful. If you're doing in-app, initially we had a box in the middle of the screen, but the rest of the screen was the same visibility. And that was a little bit confusing to the user. So we added a semi-transparent background, so our application was not as visible, and it pushed the customer to view what's in the center wall.
You blurred the remaining parts of the UI. That makes the one question form ask pop up almost like a 3D, like sometimes we do like videos where you pop up and the
That's right. Just blurring the background was very helpful. Then we looked at how large is the X to close the window relative to providing the number, whatever the score is. And we played with it and we reduced the font of the X, made it slightly different color. It is still there, but it created a scenario where it was quicker, easier for the user when they looked at this, when it popped up, to just give the number to get away from this box, which nobody wants a box on the, right? They have work to do. But instead of closing it, we made it easier for them to give us the score, and it went away. Again, small tweaks over time were brilliant.
You need the product team and some UI UX expert if you want to get to 22 to 25%. That's the bottom line.
Which we did.
You did. I'm sure you did. You were building a product, essentially.
A survey like that is a little bit of a product, not so much a product. It's part of the customer experience, and therefore you need UX people to help you with it.
I think, Boaz, if you were to choose to be a founder of a startup company, you're probably going to do really, really well. You're probably living millions of dollars on the floor just because you love people so much and you love managing people so much.
Thank you so much.
Anything else we haven't touched on? I mean, we got into the weeds here, I know, but I mean, that's the beauty of this podcast. It's just going to give you some very actionable, tactical advice as well as some strategic thinking. So
you mentioned the blog. It's a 3-part blog series that we publish, and we very, very specifically try to make it practical, actionable, not one of those, here's a nice reading, but rather, hey, I can print this and go back to my company and implement it in 2 weeks. It is very practical. Here are the 5 steps. Here's the way we implemented. Here's how we analyze. Part 3 of the series, the one we're just about to publish, will literally describe here are the playbooks. Here are the customer-facing playbooks. Here are the inter-team playbooks, right? How we worked with product, how we worked with marketing, how we worked with sales. Here are the executive playbooks, what we did and how we shared with executives. So again, people can take this and say, okay, great, I can put it to action right now.
Boaz, who is we?
Sarah Buccino, I hired to run my customer management team, and she did a fantastic job. She has background in marketing. What I was looking for when you work with small companies, and it's a one-to-many, many-to-many, there's more of an overlap in skill set with marketing than it is with high-touch, relationship-based work. So she brought that experience, and we worked very well together. She did the vast of the work itself. I provided the guidance and some of the ideas, but she turned it into actions and did a fantastic job.
Yeah, we can do a whole podcast about the importance of hiring highly talented people.
In most startups, most technology companies are people-oriented companies, knowledge-based organizations. There is nothing more important than hiring the right people.
Any other tips for somebody that wants to delve in? 1, go read the 3 blog series. 2, hire some mega talented people to help you out. 3, collaborate with your BI team if you have one, or hire outsource a BI expert to help you with this. 4th, make sure you share the results in an exciting way so that you can get the buy-in and impact the roadmap of how best you can do it, like just improve that process. Anything else?
I think you captured it.
Maybe work with a product team to increase your response rate and hire somebody with marketing skills so they can take care of the email campaigns. And don't worry about persona. Analyze by industry if you can first.
I think for us, we didn't find persona. It feels right, and maybe in other businesses, it will be a big difference. So I wouldn't make it as a conclusion, personas don't matter. We didn't find as much of a difference in our deployment, but we analyzed it. I think others should too.
It's worth checking, actually. You're right. I take it back. If you work with large enterprise companies, you're probably going to have a very different response rate. But when you work with very small companies, typically the admin is the owner, is the executive decision. So the whole thing blurs and you might not find as many differences, or they work very closely together. So they might all think the same about stuff. So.
And some of them even share the user ID and password among different people. So
guilty. I do the same in my organization.
Yeah, you captured right the best practices. There's also something like to put in the back of your mind. You'll never be perfect. There are downsides and trade-offs to every system. NPS versus CSAT versus CES versus whatever other KPI. Don't spend too much energy whining and thinking about all the bad things. Acknowledge our trade-offs, figure out the good and the bad, and be intentional with here is the methodology that takes advantage of the good things, addresses the bad things, and pragmatically move forward. Incrementally improve over time.
Next steps, everyone. Go grab a cup of coffee and go read his 3 blog series and do the thing.
Exactly.
And with that, it's a wrap. I'll see y'all on our next podcast episode.